Before I continue, tell me again, are you watching from Canada or the United States? I like to know where my story reaches. Thanks for staying with me. Now, where did we leave off? The machine was still running. Mr. Franklin stood there like nothing had happened. My hands were still stained with David's blood. When I stepped onto the factory floor that morning, it felt like walking into a place that had lost its soul. The air smelled of oil and hot metal. Machines hissed and clinked. People moved like they always did, as if today was the same as yesterday. But today was not the same. Today a man I loved had lost part of his hand, and the man who owned the place had told us to deal with it. I walked slowly. My feet felt heavy. I saw David's toolbox near the machine. A pair of gloves lay on top. Mark, our supervisor, pretended to be busy tightening a bolt. He didn't meet my eyes. Some of the workers looked scared. Others looked angry. No one spoke. "Sarah," whispered Tom, one of the older workers, when he saw me. Tom had been at Franklin Metals for more than 20 years. His back was bent a little from leaning over machines, but his eyes were kind. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not really." Tom moved his hand across his chest like he understood. "We'll figure something out. We always do." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that kindness still lived in that place. But the look on Mr. Franklin's face told a different story. He was standing by the coffee machine, wearing a suit that had never touched metal shavings. He greeted a young accountant who had just stepped in and then turned back to his phone. His attention was small and busy, like money was more important than people. I walked to the break room. The room was small and plain. A bulletin board held company notices, "Safety First," in big letters. Under it was a photo of Mr. Franklin shaking hands with an investor. The words felt empty now. I sat down with my lunch, but I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about David and how he had begged, "What will I tell Lydia?" My phone buzzed. It was a message from Lydia. It said, "How is he? Is he okay?" Her words were short and trembling. I typed back, "He is in hospital. They tried, but the finger could not be saved. I'm here." I waited, watching the message bubble. Then another bubble appeared. "I can't believe it," Lydia wrote. "He's going to need help." What did Mr. Franklin say? I swallowed. The truth felt like a stone in my throat. He said to deal with it. I typed. I watched Lydia's name disappear from the screen, as if the message was heavy for her to read. Her reply took a long time. I could imagine her alone at home with the boys, telling them, and holding back tears. After the shift, the men gathered in small clusters. They spoke quietly, like people who didn't want to be heard by the boss's ears. I stood near the locker room, listening. I heard some swear words, anger that built up through years. I heard others say, "Not again." This was not the first time safety was ignored, they said. This was not even the second. That night, I went to the hospital. The fluorescent lights in the corridor made the walls look sterile and cold. David lay in a white bed, a bandage wrapped around his hand. He looked pale, but when he saw me, his lips tried to smile. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I answered. I sat beside him, holding his good hand. His eyes were tired but still bright. The boys' drawings were on a table beside him. Crayon suns, crooked houses, stick figure people. Lydia had placed them there so he could see the boys while he slept. Seeing those drawings made my chest hurt in a way I could not dodge. The doctor came in and spoke gently. "He will need time," he said. "There's also the emotional part. Losing part of a finger can feel like losing a piece of yourself. You'll need support." I nodded, though the doctor's words were not new. The problem was bigger than a hospital. The problem was a system that placed profit over people. It was a place where the word safety was written on a board, but not meant. Over the next few days, I tried to help the family. I bought groceries. I sat with David when Lydia took the boys to school. I paid phone calls I should not have had to make. I called the company's HR office to ask what they would do for David. I wanted to be calm, but every time I dialed a number and heard a recorded voice say, "Please hold," I clenched my fists. "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell," I said when HR finally answered. I'm calling about David, the accident. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry to hear that, the woman said. Her voice was polite, like the company was practiced in speaking the right words. We'll look into it and be in touch. Days passed. We will look into it. Those words, for the first time, sounded like a broken promise. No one from the company came to see David. No one asked about the medical bills. No one asked if the family needed time off. No one offered help for the pain that would not stop in the nights. I found myself at the factory again, watching machines, watching faces. A new worker, Jonas, had joined our team. He was young and eager. He reminded me a little of David when he had first come to work, hopeful and full of energy. He asked me many questions about the job and about the best ways to avoid mistakes. I told him what I knew. I taught him to be careful and to watch the guards and levers. The company put up a new sign by the door. We care about our team. The letters were bright and shiny. I felt something like anger and pity when I looked at it. How can a place that cares leave a man in a hospital and go back to business as usual? The workers began to whisper about taking action. Someone suggested speaking up as a group. Another worried about losing their jobs. Many families depended on that work. The fear was real. The math of rent, bills, and school fees lived in everyone's head. I visited David every chance I had. He meditated sometimes, breathing slow to ease the pain. He told me about his boys, their silly fights, the way the youngest cheered when David came home with a toy. He laughed small, and sometimes he cried. You're strong, David, I told him once. You have to be strong for them. I will, he said. But I'm scared, Sarah. I don't know if I can work the same again. My hand is different now. You're still you, I said. A finger doesn't make you less of a man. Sometimes kindness does not have to be grand. It can be a sandwich made at lunch, or a ride to the store, or a silent presence in a hospital room. The family's neighbors helped. Lydia's sister brought soup. Our small group of friends at work chipped in for groceries. Those acts felt like warmth in a cold place. Meanwhile, the company's actions felt like a chill. I kept thinking about that morning when Mr. Franklin said, "Let's get back to work." His smile was small and brittle. It was like someone who orders others to march while never lifting a finger. The more I thought about him, the angrier I became, but I also felt something else. A quiet, steady determination. If kindness could be a warm bowl of soup, then courage could be the quiet step that moves a group of people from fear to action. One afternoon, I stayed after my shift. The factory hummed with the usual noise, but fewer people were around. I saw the cutting machine, Model Z, 80, idle now, its metal teeth silent. I knelt and ran my fingers along the guard. The bolts that should have held the safety shield were loose. I felt a cold tightness in my chest. Someone had not fixed them. Or perhaps someone had pretended to check. I took a photo with my phone. My hands trembled. I wanted to show everyone. This is proof. But what could a photo do against a man with wealth and power? Still, I sent it to Lydia. Look, I wrote. This is the machine. It was not safe. Her reply came quickly. Thank you. Please be careful. The next morning, something changed. Word flew across the floor like sparks. A small group of workers had gathered in the break room. They looked nervous, but ready. They had made a plan: speak to HR together and demand action. Some had even written down a list of safety problems. This was small at first, only a dozen of us. But when we spread the word, more came. Fear walked beside courage, but it did not stop them. I stood at the edge of the group, feeling both fear and hope. I thought of David lying in his bed at home, of his boys' drawings. I thought that if no one spoke, nothing would change. If kindness was to live in our place of work, it needed our voices. We walked to the HR office together. Our steps felt louder than usual. The woman at the desk looked up at us and asked, "Can I help you?" "We're here to talk about safety," Tom said. His voice was steady, like old wood holding a house. He spoke for all of us. He told them about the missing guards, the loose bolts, the days we were rushed to finish orders. He talked about David, about the man who had lost his finger. The HR woman took notes.
"We will file this," she said.
"We'll pass it to management." Again, those words. We will. We had heard them before. But this time we did not leave. We waited. We stood like a small wall of people determined to be heard. Minutes later, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mr. Franklin's shoes were louder than usual. He walked in with a slight frown. He looked at our faces like we were a small, annoying cloud. He adjusted his tie and asked, "What is this about?" "We want safety fixes," Tom said. "We want checks on equipment. We want help for David." Mr. Franklin's face hardened. For a moment, I thought we would lose. He could call security, he could threaten, he could fire one and scare the rest. His power was real. But then something strange happened. A group of workers began to speak up, louder now. They told stories of times they were hurt, of times they were left waiting. The words were simple and true. The truth, even in a small room, can gather strength like rain finding a river. Mr. Franklin's jaw tightened. He said, "We will review the complaints. But we can't stop production. Orders are already late." That morning, we left with no promises that felt solid. But we had planted a seed. Sometimes a seed is all you need. And then, without warning, as we began to return to work, a loud metallic crash echoed from the far end of the factory. The noise was sharp and sudden. People dropped what they were doing. A terrible, high scream cut the air, a sound I recognized too well. I turned toward the sound. Machines clanked, and a cloud of dust rose. A lamp fell and shattered, and someone shouted, "Get back." My heart froze. The sound came from the area near the storage of raw metal sheets. I could see people running. I could hear the siren of the factory alarm beginning to wail. I ran. My legs pushed me forward faster than my mind could catch up. And then I saw him, Jonas, the new worker. He was on the floor, his leg pinned under a stack of falling metal sheets. His face was pale, and he was breathing fast. Blood ran down his forehead where a piece of metal had grazed him. His eyes found mine, wide with shock and fear. The factory smelled like hot metal and dust and something burning. People crowded around. Mark was yelling for a lever to lift the sheets. Someone called for an ambulance. Jonas' hand clutched at his leg. I looked up and saw, in the middle distance, Mr. Franklin frozen, his phone in his hand. For a second, he seemed like a statue, powerful but still. The alarm blared, and smoke curled in a far corner. My chest felt squeezed. We had just taken our first step toward change, and here was danger again, right in front of us. Jonas cried out in pain. "It's my leg. I can't move." We pulled and pushed, trying to lift the metal, our hands scraping, our knees buckling. Sweat and dust stuck to our skin. Someone shouted that the ambulance would take time. We needed to act now. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Tom. "Hold on," he said, and he pushed with a strength that surprised me. We were working together, muscles and breath and will. But the sheets were heavy, heavier than I had imagined. Then, a loud snap echoed, and one of the supports broke free. The stack shuddered. Everything felt slow, stretched thin like a rubber band. We needed to get Jonas free. We needed to move faster. Then, just as one of us found a gap and the idea of freeing him seemed possible, a new sound rose, this time not metal, but voices shouting from the top floor. Someone yelled, "Fire! There's smoke in the electrical room." My mind raced. Smoke meant danger spreading. People screamed and pushed. I could feel the panic climb like a cold ladder up my spine. We had Jonas pinned down, and we had a spreading fire. In that single moment, the world felt like it had tilted. The factory that had once felt like a place for living and work now wore the face of danger. I looked at Jonas again, his breath quick, his fingers white, his eyes pleading. I knew then that something had to change in us, and in that place. We could not keep doing the same thing and expect different outcomes. But the choice we had to make in those seconds was raw and urgent. Save the man pinned or run from the smoke. I had no time to think long. I moved with the others, hands and strength pushing at the metal, but the smoke drifted closer, and the alarm wailing made my ears ring. The factory seemed to be deciding for us. And just as hope that we might pull Jonas free flickered, an explosion of light from the electrical room flared, hotter and louder than the alarm. The floor beneath my feet trembled. I blinked against the heat. Everything went white for a moment. When my vision cleared, all I could see was smoke, thick, gray, and choking. The factory, once filled with the hum of machines, was now a storm of confusion and fear. Sparks danced in the air like angry fireflies. Someone shouted, "Get everyone out!" Another voice cried, "He's still trapped." Jonas. I coughed hard, the bitter smell of burning wires filling my lungs. The alarm screamed above our heads, flashing red lights across faces streaked with sweat and soot. I looked down. Jonas was still pinned, his leg twisted under the metal sheets. His face had gone pale, his breaths coming fast and shallow. "Sarah?" Tom's voice came from behind me. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his arms were blackened from grease and smoke. "We have to go." "I'm not leaving him," I shouted. "Sarah, go if you want, but I'm not leaving him," I snapped, my voice trembling with anger and fear. I dropped to my knees beside Jonas. "Hey, look at me, Jonas. Stay awake." He tried to nod, his eyes darting around, dazed. "It hurts, please." I know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're going to get you out. Just hold on." Tom cursed under his breath, then bent down beside me. "Fine," he said. "We do this fast." The metal sheets were still scorching hot from the friction and sparks. We grabbed a crowbar lying nearby and wedged it under one of the edges. "On three," I yelled. 1, 2, 3. We pushed with everything we had. My arms burned, my back screamed, but the metal barely budged. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. Around us, people were shouting and running for the exits. The smoke was getting thicker. The fire was spreading. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice that froze me. "Leave him." It was Mr. Franklin. He stood a few yards away, his suit jacket gone, his tie loose, but his voice as cold as ever. "The fire's spreading fast." "Get out now," he barked. "Are you insane?" I shouted back. "He's still alive." "Sarah, this isn't the time for heroics," he snapped. "We'll call the fire department. Let them handle it. By the time they get here, he'll be dead." I screamed. He hesitated for a second, just a second, but then turned toward the exit. "You're responsible for your own choices," he said. And he walked away. Just like before. Just like he left David in the hospital. I felt fury rise in me, hotter than the fire around us. I looked at Tom, who was still trying to pry up the metal. "We're doing this," I said. He nodded, gritting his teeth. "Let's go again." We pushed harder this time, and I felt something shift. "Again," I shouted. The metal groaned, lifting slightly. Jonas screamed in pain, but that meant he was still conscious. Another worker ran over, Angela, a small woman from the night shift. "Here," she yelled, grabbing the end of the crowbar. With 3 of us, we finally managed to lift one of the sheets enough to drag Jonas out. He screamed, clutching his leg, but I pulled him close, wrapping my arm under his shoulder. "You're okay. You're okay," I kept saying, though I wasn't sure he was. The fire was spreading toward the storage room now, and the heat was unbearable. I could feel it burning the back of my neck. "Move," Tom shouted. He grabbed Jonas's other side, and the 3 of us stumbled toward the exit. Behind us, metal popped and hissed, and the roof groaned under the strain. We burst through the side door into the cold air. Outside, people were gathered, coughing, crying, shouting names. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, firefighters, ambulances, all coming too late. I laid Jonas down on the ground as 2 paramedics rushed toward us. His leg was badly crushed, the skin torn, blood soaking through his pants. One of the medics pressed a cloth against the wound while the other shouted into a radio. "Stay with me, Jonas," I said, gripping his hand. His eyes rolled back for a moment, then focused on me again. "You're okay?" I whispered. You're safe now. He managed a weak smile before the medics lifted him onto a stretcher and rushed him into the ambulance. When I turned around, I saw the factory burning. Flames licked the walls, black smoke pouring into the sky. People were standing in clusters, watching everything they'd built go up in fire. Some were crying, not just for the loss of the building, but for what it meant. I scanned the crowd and spotted Mr. Franklin standing near his car, talking to a firefighter. His arms were crossed, his face blank, like he was already thinking about insurance and rebuilding. That was the moment I realized the fire wasn't the worst thing that had happened in that factory. The real fire, the one that destroyed everything good, had been burning inside him long before today. The next few days were chaos. The story hit the local news. Factory fire at Franklin Metals injures worker, the headline said. No mention of neglect. No mention of broken safety rules. Just an unfortunate accident. The firefighters managed to control the flames after several hours, but the building was heavily damaged. The workers were told to stay home until further notice. That meant no pay. I spent most of those days at the hospital, first with Jonas, then with David. David was getting better, though his spirit was different. He smiled less now, talked less. The loss of his finger had changed something deep inside him. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 35 years old. Before I begin, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because I really want to know how far this story will travel. Now, I've seen a lot of things in my life, but nothing shook me like what happened at my workplace 2 years ago. It's a story that still wakes me up at night. It's about my best friend, David, and how our company boss, Mr. Franklin, left him to suffer after a terrible accident at work. The day it happened, I remember the sound of the machine, loud, rough, echoing through the warehouse like thunder. Then came the scream. I'll never forget that scream. It wasn't just pain. It was shock, fear, disbelief. I turned around, and there was David, holding his hand, blood dripping from where his finger used to be. His face went pale, his eyes wide open, like he couldn't believe it was really happening. We rushed him to the hospital in the company van. I sat in the back seat, pressing my scarf against his hand, whispering to him, "It's okay, David, it's okay." But deep down, I wasn't sure it was. When we got to the hospital, Mr. Franklin came in with us, but only for a moment. He stood by the doorway, looking down at his phone as if checking his stock prices was more important than what was happening to one of his workers. The nurse said David needed surgery immediately. Mr. Franklin frowned, then sighed. He looked at me and said the words that still haunt me to this day. "Deal with it, Sarah. I've got a meeting." Then he turned around and walked away.
Just like that.
He left my best friend, bleeding, crying, terrified, in the hospital. And that was the moment something inside me broke. I remember standing there, frozen. My mind couldn't even process it. How could someone be so heartless? How could a man who built a company with the sweat and hands of workers like David just walk away like it was nothing? The nurses moved quickly, taking David inside. I followed him until they closed the doors to the operating room. My hands were shaking. My scarf was soaked with his blood. I sat down on the hospital bench, and that's when I realized I couldn't just deal with it. Something had to be done. But before I tell you how everything unfolded, let me take you back a little to how we got here. Because to understand the pain of that day, you have to know who David was. David was more than a coworker to me. He was my friend, my brother, my rock. We started working at Franklin Metals around the same time, 6 years ago. He was a big guy, with strong hands and a laugh that could fill the entire factory. He was one of those people who could make you smile even when you were having the worst day. He loved his job. I mean, he really did. He'd often say, "Sarah, hard work never kills anyone. It just makes you stronger." But I used to tease him, telling him he should take it easy sometimes. The machines we worked with were dangerous, huge, powerful, and unforgiving. But David always believed in doing his best no matter what. I, on the other hand, had my doubts about the company. Mr. Franklin, the owner, was the kind of man who smiled at investors and frowned at employees. He didn't care much about safety, he cared about productivity. The more we produced, the happier he was. He'd often remind us during meetings, time is money. Don't waste either. There were times when we complained about faulty equipment or missing safety gear, but nothing ever got fixed. "We'll look into it," was always the answer. And by we, he meant no one. But life went on. We worked hard. We laughed during lunch breaks. We shared stories about our families. David had a wife, Lydia, and 2 little boys. He adored them. Every payday, he'd rush home to buy them gifts. Sometimes it was small, ice cream or new sneakers, but to him, it meant everything. That's the kind of man David was, simple, kind, and full of life. Then came that morning, the one that changed everything. It was a cold Tuesday in February. The air was heavy with mist, and the factories smelled of oil and iron. David and I were assigned to the new cutting machine, Model Z80, imported from Germany. It was massive, with sharp, spinning blades that could slice through steel like butter. We complained earlier that the machine didn't have proper guards. I even told the supervisor, Mark, that it looked unsafe. But he waved me off, saying, "If you follow instructions, you'll be fine." We weren't fine. David was adjusting a metal sheet when the lever jammed. He leaned forward, trying to fix it. I was just a few feet away when the blade suddenly spun to life. It all happened in seconds, too fast for anyone to stop it. There was a loud clunk, then a scream that tore through the entire floor. I dropped the metal rod in my hand and ran. The sight made my stomach twist. His finger was gone. Clean cut. He was in shock, holding his hand, shaking, saying, "Sarah, it's gone. Oh God, it's gone." Everyone froze. No one knew what to do. I screamed for help, and Mark finally rushed over. He called the boss, and within minutes, Mr. Franklin appeared, his expensive shoes tapping on the oily floor, his suit looking completely out of place in that chaos. Instead of comforting David, he scolded us for stopping production. "You people can't handle a simple machine?" he snapped. I wanted to slap him, but I held it in. We got David into the van, and I sat beside him, pressing the cloth against his wound, whispering, "Hang in there." He kept whispering, "My finger. What will I tell Lydia?" At the hospital, things went from bad to worse. The doctor said they could reattach the finger if we got proper consent and financial approval. That's when Mr. Franklin dropped his bombshell and walked out, saying, "Deal with it. Deal with it." Those words burned into my mind like fire. As I sat there in that cold hospital corridor, watching the nurses rush back and forth, I felt anger, sadness, and guilt all mixed together. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I had to be strong for David. Hours passed. No call from the boss. No message. Nothing. When the doctor came out of surgery, he looked tired. "We did our best," he said softly, "but he lost too much blood. We couldn't save the finger." I covered my mouth and turned away. That night, I went home with blood still on my hands. I sat in the dark, thinking about everything that had happened. And one thought kept echoing in my head. If that machine was fixed when we complained, none of this would have happened. But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning, I walked into the factory, ready to demand answers. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The machine, the same one that cut off David's finger, was still running. Workers were using it like nothing happened. And standing beside it, with a cup of coffee in his hand, was Mr. Franklin. He looked up at me, smiled faintly, and said, "Good morning, Sarah. Let's get back to work." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an accident. It was something deeper, darker. And if I wanted justice for David, I was going to have to fight for it. Because in that factory, compassion was dead. And someone had to bring it back. When he heard about the fire, he closed his eyes and said quietly, it was only a matter of time. Jonas was in a separate ward, his leg bandaged and held together by metal rods. The doctors said he might walk again, but it would take months of therapy. I sat by his bed one afternoon, thinking about how everything seemed to fall apart around us. He opened his eyes and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me." I squeezed his hand. You have done the same. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But not everyone would. His words stayed with me. Not everyone would. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, watching the rain hit the window. I thought about kindness, how rare it had become, and about courage, how sometimes it shows up when you least expect it, when fear is loudest. I also thought about Mr. Franklin. I pictured him sitting in his big house, probably blaming everyone but himself. People like him never saw the human cost behind their money. To them, workers were just numbers. Replaceable. Forgettable. But not to me. Not anymore. 2 weeks later, Mr. Franklin called for a meeting at the remains of the factory. He said he wanted to discuss the future of the company. I didn't want to go, but Tom called me and said, "We all should be there. We need to hear what he has to say." When we arrived, the building looked dead, charred walls, broken windows, the smell of smoke still clinging to the air. Mr. Franklin stood on a small platform, wearing his usual suit and that same cold smile. Around him were company officials, men in ties holding clipboards. He started speaking. "We've suffered a great loss," he said. "But I want to assure you that Franklin Metals will rise again. We will rebuild, stronger and safer." Safer. I almost laughed. Then he added, "However, due to financial strain, we'll have to let go of several employees temporarily." A ripple went through the crowd. People began to murmur. Some shouted, "That's not fair." Others cursed under their breath. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. "You mean to tell us," I said, "that after 2 people got hurt under your watch, after you ignored our safety complaints, you're firing us?" Mr. Franklin's eyes met mine, cold and sharp. "I'm not firing anyone," he said. "Just suspending operations. You'll be called back when the company stabilizes." "That's firing us," I said. "You just don't want to use the word." He frowned. "Watch your tone, Sarah." "No," I said, my voice rising. "You watch yours. We're human beings, not machines. We bleed, we break, and you don't even care." The crowd went silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken windows. Mr. Franklin's jaw tightened. "If you don't like how I run my company," he said slowly, "you're free to leave." I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "Maybe I will, but I won't stay silent anymore." I turned to face the crowd. David lost his finger because of negligence. Jonas almost lost his life. How many more before you speak up? The workers murmured. Some nodded. Some looked away. Fear still had its grip on them. But I saw something else too, a spark. The same spark that had made us stand together before. Mr. Franklin turned to one of his men and said quietly, "End this meeting." Then he walked away, his shoes crunching on the debris, his back straight and cold as ever. As he disappeared into his car, Tom came to stand beside me. "You know he's going to make trouble for you," he said softly. "I know," I said. "But maybe trouble is exactly what he needs." That night, I couldn't shake a thought from my head. We couldn't just wait for things to change. We had to make them change. For David. For Jonas. For everyone who worked hard and deserved respect. But I didn't know that my decision to fight would uncover something much darker, something about that fire, about what caused it. Because the truth wasn't what any of us thought. The night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rumbled in the distance like the sky itself was angry. I sat by the window, staring at the streetlights flickering on the wet pavement. Everything inside me felt heavy. Anger, sadness, and a kind of fear I didn't want to admit. Mr. Franklin had made one thing clear. He wasn't going to take responsibility. Not for David. Not for Jonas. Not for anyone. And now he was trying to sweep everything under the rug, pretending the fire was just another accident. But I couldn't stop thinking about something Jonas had said before the fire. He told me that morning, just a few hours before the chaos began, that one of the older machines had been making strange noises. He'd even mentioned it to Mark, the supervisor. Mark told him to ignore it and keep working. Now that same area was where the fire had started. That couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, I decided to go back to the factory site. It was still fenced off with yellow caution tape, and a security guard stood near the entrance. The walls were black with soot, and the smell of burnt metal hung thick in the air. I waited until the guard stepped away to answer a phone call, then slipped through a side gap in the fence. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. The floor was covered in ashes and broken glass. I stepped carefully over twisted metal beams and collapsed shelves. The place that once echoed with the sound of work now felt like a graveyard. As I walked toward the storage area, the same place where Jonas was pinned, I noticed something strange near the corner of the electrical room. A melted metal box lay half open, its wires blackened. I knelt down, brushing off the soot. Inside, I found what looked like the remains of a power regulator. It was burnt, but not completely. I could still see a company label on it, Franklin Metals, Electrical Maintenance Division. That didn't make sense. We didn't have an electrical maintenance division. We always outsourced those jobs to a third-party company called Prime Engineering Services. That's what Mr. Franklin had always told us. I felt my heart start to race. Why would something have our company's label if we weren't supposed to handle it internally? I took a photo of the device and tucked a small piece of the melted label into my pocket. As I stood up, I heard a noise behind me, boots crunching on debris. Sarah? I turned quickly. It was Mark, the supervisor. He looked surprised to see me. What are you doing here? He asked sharply. I could ask you the same thing, I replied. I was checking the damage, he said, his voice low. Mr. Franklin asked me to make a list of what can be salvaged. Really? I said. Because it looks to me like the fire started right here, in a part of the factory we weren't even supposed to handle ourselves. He frowned. You shouldn't be here, Sarah. It's dangerous. Answer me, Mark, I said, stepping closer. Why did this machine have our company's name on it? He looked away. You're reading too much into this. No, I'm not, I said, my voice rising. David lost his finger. Jonas almost lost his leg. I think we deserve to know what really happened. Mark rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. You need to drop this, Sarah. Please. Why? I demanded. Because it might make Mr. Franklin look bad? Mark's eyes flicked toward the exit. You don't understand. It's bigger than that. What's bigger than people's lives? I shot back. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, muttering, Just go home, Sarah. Don't get involved in things you don't understand. I watched him leave, my heart pounding. His voice shook, not from anger, but fear. That was when I knew I was right. Something wasn't adding up. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. I pulled up the photo I took of the burnt regulator and zoomed in on the label. Part of it was missing, but I could still make out something else under the main text, faintly printed words. Internal use only. Prototype. Prototype? Why would a factory that made metal parts have a prototype electrical regulator inside its machines? I needed answers. So, the next morning I went to see David again. He was still recovering, his hand bandaged, but his spirit slowly coming back. He smiled when he saw me but noticed my serious expression immediately. What's wrong? He asked. I think the fire wasn't an accident, I said quietly. And I think Mr. Franklin knows more than he's telling. David frowned. What are you talking about? I told him everything, about the label, about Mark's reaction, about the strange prototype marking. He listened carefully, his jaw tightening with every word. Sarah, he said slowly, if what you're saying is true, it means they were testing unsafe equipment in a working factory. Exactly, I said. And people got hurt because of it. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, You can't handle this alone. I'm not alone, I said. I have you. And the others. He nodded. Then we do this, right? We gather proof. That was when the plan began. Over the next few days, David and I started talking to other workers quietly, people who might have seen or heard things before the fire. It wasn't easy. Most were scared of losing what little they had left. But slowly, information started to surface. One worker, Angela, told us that a week before the fire, a truck came in late at night delivering new equipment with no paperwork. She remembered because the delivery men told her not to log it into the system. Another worker, Luis, said he overheard Mark arguing with someone from management about testing something new on site. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. The fire wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of an experiment gone wrong, a shortcut taken by Mr. Franklin's management to save money and avoid proper testing regulations. And Jonas? He was almost killed because of it. I printed every photo, every statement, every bit of proof we could find. I kept them in a brown folder, hidden in a drawer at home. Then, one evening, as I was locking up my office laptop, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "Stop digging, Sarah." The message was short, only one sentence. "You don't know who you're dealing with." My stomach dropped. I looked around, feeling suddenly exposed. Someone knew what I was doing. I ran to David's apartment that night and showed him the message. He read it slowly, his face turning pale. "They're watching you," he said. "I know," I whispered. "But I'm not stopping." He sighed and leaned back. "You're braver than me." "No," I said. "I'm just tired of being quiet." We both knew what we had to do next. We decided to contact a local journalist, Rachel Carter, a reporter from the Boston Herald who had covered factory safety issues before. David knew her through a friend from church. I was nervous, but I knew it was our only shot. We arranged to meet her 2 days later at a quiet diner on the edge of town. I brought the folder of evidence and placed it on the table between us. Rachel listened carefully, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. "This is serious," she said. "If you're right, this could blow the lid off the entire company. But you need to be ready for pushback. They won't go down quietly." "I don't care," I said. "They've hurt too many people." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll start digging from my end. You just keep yourself safe." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope didn't last long. The very next morning, I arrived at David's apartment to find the door wide open and the place in chaos. Papers were scattered everywhere. The brown folder, the one with all the evidence, was gone. My heart stopped. "David," I shouted, running through the apartment. "David." No answer. The bathroom light was on. The window was open. The curtain fluttered in the cold morning air. And on the table, next to a half-finished cup of coffee, was a single piece of paper. In shaky handwriting, it read, "They found out. I had to leave. Don't trust anyone." My knees went weak. The room spun. David was gone. And I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. That note lay on the table like a wound. I stood there staring at it, my hands trembling. The words looked rushed, like he'd written them in fear, in the middle of running for his life. "They found out. I had to leave. Don't trust anyone." For a long moment, I couldn't move. My mind was blank except for one thought pounding again and again. They got to him. I forced myself to breathe. Then, slowly, I began to look around the apartment for clues. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, but the place was clearly searched. Whoever broke in knew exactly what they were looking for. The brown folder was gone. All our proof. All the photos, statements, and files we'd spent weeks gathering, it was all gone. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. That was when I noticed something strange. On the counter, next to the sink, was David's coffee mug. Still warm. Whoever took him, or whoever he was running from, had come minutes before I arrived. I felt panic start to crawl up my throat, but I forced it down. If David had written that note, it meant he was alive.
For now.
I had to find him. I called Rachel Carter, the journalist, and told her everything. She met me an hour later at a gas station just outside the city. Her hair was tied up, and she wore dark glasses. When she saw me, she didn't even speak at first. She just pulled me into her car and drove off. Once we were far enough, she finally said, "You think they took him?" "I don't know," I said, trying to hold my voice steady. "But they found our evidence. Someone must have told them." "Someone inside the company?" she asked. I nodded. "Mark, maybe. He warned me to stay out of it. But I can't believe David would just run without telling me where he was going." Rachel gripped the steering wheel. We'll find him, but we have to be careful. If they're covering something this big, it means a lot of money's at stake. We drove in silence for a while, heading toward a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was one of those old roadside places that smelled like coffee and burnt toast. Rachel ordered 2 cups of black coffee and pulled out her recorder.
Start from the beginning, she said.
I told her everything, from the accident with the heavy machine, to Mr. Franklin abandoning David in the hospital, to the fire, to the strange prototype label. I told her about Mark's warning, the anonymous email, and now, David's disappearance. Rachel listened closely, only interrupting to ask for dates and names. When I was done, she leaned back and sighed. This isn't just a safety scandal, she said. This looks like corporate fraud. If Franklin Metals was using untested prototypes on its factory floor, they were breaking multiple federal laws. But how do we prove it now that the folder's gone? I asked. Rachel smiled faintly. We still have your photos. You sent me copies last week, remember? I blinked. You back them up?
Always do, she said.
And I've already sent them to a contact in Boston. Someone who specializes in industrial law. I let out a shaky laugh, a wave of relief washing over me. You're smarter than I thought. She smiled. That's my job. But just as I started to relax, something caught my eye. A black SUV had pulled into the parking lot outside. It parked 2 spaces away from Rachel's car. 2 men stepped out, both in suits, both wearing dark sunglasses. They didn't look like regular customers. Rachel noticed them too. You know them? I shook my head. Then don't look at them again, she whispered. Stay calm. She took a sip of her coffee like nothing was wrong, but I could see the tension in her jaw. One of the men pretended to check his phone while glancing in our direction. I think we've got company, I whispered. Yeah, Rachel said softly. Time to go. We left the diner through the back exit, slipping into a narrow alley. Rachel moved quickly, leading me toward her car parked a few blocks away. But when we reached the corner, another black SUV turned down the street ahead of us. They're following us, I said. Rachel didn't reply. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me into a small side street, then into the back door of a hardware store. We hid behind tall shelves filled with paint cans. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. After a few tense minutes, the sound of footsteps passed by outside, then faded. Rachel exhaled slowly. Okay, we're not safe out here. We need to go off-grid for a while. Off-grid?
Yeah.
Somewhere they can't track us. I've got a friend up north, a retired journalist who owns a cabin near Lake Winnipesaukee. We'll stay there until we figure out our next move. I nodded, still catching my breath. But what about David? We'll find him, she said firmly. I promise. We waited until dark before leaving town. The drive to the cabin took nearly 4 hours. I barely spoke, staring out the window at the endless stretch of trees. Every car behind us felt suspicious. Every shadow made my heart jump. When we finally arrived, the cabin was quiet and isolated, surrounded by tall pines. The lake shimmered under the moonlight like glass. Inside, Rachel set up her laptop on a small wooden table. We'll stay connected through a VPN, she said. No direct calls, no social media, no credit cards. If they're tracking you, we can't make it easy for them. I sat down on the couch, exhaustion hitting me all at once. I can't believe this is happening. We just wanted justice for David. Rachel looked at me for a long moment. Sometimes, when you try to do the right thing, the wrong people take notice. For a while, we sat in silence. The sound of crickets filled the room. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. My heart skipped. I opened it. It was a photo. David, sitting on a chair, in what looked like a warehouse. His face was bruised, his shirt torn. And underneath the photo, a single message. He shouldn't have talked. You're next. I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. Rachel picked it up, her eyes widening. Jesus, she whispered. They've got him. Tears filled my eyes. We have to help him. We can't just hide here. Rachel stood up, pacing. We can't go to the police yet, they might be in on it. If these people are connected to Franklin, they could have law enforcement in their pocket. So, what do we do? I asked desperately. We need more proof, she said. Something solid enough that they can't bury it. Something we can release to the media all at once. I shook my head. We had proof. It's gone. Then we find more, Rachel said firmly. And this time, we make it public before they can stop us. She looked out the window toward the dark forest, her face lit only by the moonlight. We'll find where they're keeping him. And when we do, we'll make sure the whole country knows what Franklin Metals did. Her words lit something inside me, a spark of determination, even in the middle of fear.
But that spark didn't last long.
Because just as I began to speak, a sudden crash shattered the quiet night. The window exploded inward. A bottle rolled across the floor, flames bursting from its neck. A Molotov cocktail. The cabin was on fire. The explosion threw me backward. The flames burst across the wooden floor like a wave, spreading fast. The air filled with smoke, thick and choking. Rachel screamed my name, and before I could answer, she grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the back door. Go! Now, she shouted, coughing. We stumbled into the cold night air, gasping. Behind us, the cabin burned bright orange against the darkness, the fire reflecting on the surface of the lake. Sparks flew up into the night sky like angry fireflies. Rachel, your laptop, I shouted, realizing everything. Our files, her notes, was inside. Forget it, she yelled. We need to live first. I wanted to run back in, to grab that laptop, but she was right. The heat was too much. Within seconds, the roof began to collapse, sending a loud crack echoing across the forest. We ran through the trees, our lungs burning, the smell of smoke clinging to our clothes. We didn't stop until the flames were just a distant glow through the branches. My knees gave out, and I fell to the ground, shaking. Rachel bent over, catching her breath. They found us, she said, her voice trembling. They found us out here. How? I gasped. You said the VPN would protect us. They must have had a tracker, maybe on your phone, maybe your car. I froze. My phone. Without hesitation, I pulled it out and threw it as far as I could into the woods. It landed with a dull thud somewhere in the darkness. Rachel nodded.
Good.
From now on, we use burner phones only. She looked back toward the faint glow of the burning cabin. We can't stay here. They'll come back to check if we made it out. Where do we go? There's a safe house, she said after a moment. One of my old contacts from Boston runs a community center that helps whistleblowers. We can hide there until I can make some calls. I nodded weakly, though my mind was spinning. My friend was missing. The people responsible for his suffering had tried to burn us alive. And the world had no idea what was happening. But deep inside, something hardened. I wasn't going to run anymore. As we started walking down the dark forest trail, I whispered to myself, they messed with the wrong people. By dawn, we reached the edge of a small town in New Hampshire. Rachel found a diner that opened early and ordered 2 cups of coffee and some eggs, though neither of us could eat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. While Rachel made a few discreet calls from a payphone outside, I stared at the cracked window of the diner, lost in thought. That was when I saw him. Across the street, a man in a dark jacket stood near a parked car. He wasn't looking at me directly, but something about him felt wrong. He kept touching his ear, like he was wearing an earpiece. I turned my gaze away quickly, pretending to look at the menu. When Rachel came back inside, I whispered, "We're being watched." Her eyes flicked to the window. "How many?"
"1.
Across the street. She looked down at her coffee, then murmured, "When I say now, we leave through the back." Quietly. She slipped a 20 under the plate, and a few minutes later, she whispered, "Now." We slipped out the back door and hurried down a narrow alley. I could hear footsteps behind us. 2 sets now. They were closing in fast. Rachel turned sharply into another street, her face set. "There, bus stop. Next one leaves in 5 minutes. If we can make it." But we didn't make it. Before we reached the stop, a black sedan screeched around the corner, blocking the road. The same man I'd seen earlier stepped out, holding up a badge. "Sarah Thompson," he said. His voice was calm, but his tone made my blood run cold. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded. "Federal investigation," the man said smoothly. "We need you to come with us." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Show me your credentials." He held out the badge for a split second, too fast to read. "It's not safe out here," he continued. "You're in danger. Let us take you somewhere secure." Rachel whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "Real federal agents don't say things like that. Run." Before the man could move, we bolted down the street. He shouted something, and two more men jumped out of the car, chasing us. I could hear them gaining ground. My legs screamed with pain. My lungs felt like fire, but I didn't stop. Rachel grabbed my hand, pulling me toward a construction site up ahead. We ducked behind a pile of metal pipes and crouched low, trying to catch our breath. "They're not agents," I said, my voice shaking. "No," Rachel said grimly. "They're company men." We stayed hidden for several minutes, listening to their voices echo down the street. Finally, the sound of the car faded. Rachel turned to me. "We need to get out of New Hampshire. If Franklin's reach is this wide, they probably have local cops too." "Then we go to the press," I said. "You still have your backup, right?" She hesitated. "The files are safe, but only accessible from a secure network in Boston. If we can make it there, I can upload everything." "Then that's where we go?" I said. "No more hiding." The journey to Boston was long and tense. We used fake names to buy bus tickets, stayed in cheap motels under cash, and avoided main highways. Every time someone stared too long, my heart jumped. But we made it. Rachel's contact worked for a small, independent news outlet called The Beacon. It wasn't a huge paper, but it was known for exposing corruption. The editor, a tall woman with short gray hair named Linda Chavez, agreed to meet us in her office late that night. Rachel showed her the surviving photos, backup files, and copies of David's hospital records. Linda looked through everything carefully. "This is serious," she said at last. "If this goes public, Franklin Metals will be finished. But you'll need to be ready for retaliation. They'll smear you, threaten you, maybe worse." "I don't care," I said quietly. "They've already done their worst." Linda nodded slowly. "All right. We'll prepare the article and launch it in 2 days. I'll assign a team to verify the evidence and contact federal investigators myself." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hope again. We left the office and went to a small hotel nearby, exhausted but relieved. As I lay on the bed, I whispered a prayer for David. Wherever he was, I hoped he knew I hadn't given up on him. Then, just before dawn, Rachel's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. We both looked at it, our hearts pounding. It was a video. David, alive but barely. He was in the same warehouse from before, tied to a chair. His voice was weak, trembling. "Sarah, please don't trust them. It's not just the company. It's bigger. Franklin isn't the one in charge." Before he could finish, the camera jolted. A man's voice said off screen, "That's enough." Then the screen went black. The message ended with one sentence in bold, white text. "Stay quiet or you'll never see him again." Rachel looked at me, her face pale. "This changes everything," she whispered. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. He said Franklin isn't in charge. Then who is? The question hung heavy between us. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. And then, from the hallway outside our room, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. A shadow paused under our door. Then someone knocked, 3 times. The knock echoed through the room like a heartbeat, 3 slow, heavy raps. Rachel froze. My hands went cold. Neither of us moved for a full 10 seconds. The knock came again. "Who is it?" Rachel called, her voice steady but strained. Silence. Then a voice, low, male, calm. "Room service." We hadn't ordered anything. Rachel mouthed to me, "Don't move." She crept quietly toward the bedside drawer and pulled out a small pepper spray canister. Then she motioned toward the bathroom. I slipped inside, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. I heard her footsteps on the carpet, then the sound of the chain latch sliding softly into place. "What do you want?" she asked through the door. No answer. Then, suddenly, the door handle rattled.
Hard.
Rachel shouted, "Go away. I'm calling the police." Footsteps shuffled, and then I heard the sound of retreating boots down the hall. The silence that followed was worse than the noise before. Rachel opened the bathroom door, her face pale. "Pack your things. We're leaving now." "Where do we go?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "To the police, but not the local ones. We go straight to the federal building in Boston. If David's right, and this goes beyond Franklin, we need to make it national. Somewhere too big for them to cover up." I nodded, still shaking. Within minutes, we were in a cab heading downtown. The driver barely spoke. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting a black car to appear behind us. But the streets were quiet, the early morning mist rolling across the city like a ghost. When we arrived at the federal building, we went straight to the front desk. Rachel flashed her press ID and said, "We need to speak with someone in the Department of Labor immediately." The security guard hesitated, then made a call. Within minutes, 2 agents came out to meet us. One of them, Agent Miller, looked like he hadn't slept in days. The other, Agent Chen, carried a tablet and spoke quickly. Rachel laid everything on the table: our files, the photos, David's hospital reports, the video of his warning. The agents exchanged a look. "You're saying Franklin Metals was testing unapproved equipment, leading to multiple injuries and a factory fire?" Miller asked. "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "And now they've kidnapped a witness who tried to expose them." Miller leaned back, exhaling. "You realize what you're alleging involves corporate fraud, labor law violations, and possibly federal conspiracy."
I realize, I said.
"But it's true." Chen nodded slowly.
All right.
"We'll open a case file. But we'll need to verify your evidence first." Rachel leaned forward. "You'd better move fast. People's lives are in danger." The agents promised to start investigating immediately. They placed us under temporary protection, taking us to a secure government housing facility while they worked. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to safety. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying David's words in my mind. It's not just the company. Franklin isn't the one in charge. What did he mean? I decided to look deeper. Using one of the secure computers in the facility, I searched through corporate records, cross-referencing Franklin Metals with other industrial suppliers. That's when I found something that made my stomach drop. Franklin Metals was a subsidiary, a smaller branch of a much larger company called Northstar Holdings. And Northstar Holdings had contracts with government agencies, including the Department of Defense. I sat there staring at the screen, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just about factory equipment. Northstar had been secretly developing advanced alloy regulators, materials meant for military technology. If they'd been testing prototypes inside Franklin's factory, it wasn't just illegal, it was dangerous. David had stumbled onto something massive, and that's why he'd been taken. I printed the records and ran to Rachel's room. "Look at this," I said breathlessly, handing her the papers. She read them, her eyes widening. Northstar Holdings. Oh my God. That's why they're so desperate to silence us. This isn't just corporate, it's federal. Before she could say another word, the lights in the facility flickered, then went out. A second later, alarms blared. Rachel grabbed her phone. "That's not supposed to happen here. This place has backup power." I looked toward the hallway and saw shadows moving under the emergency lights. "Rachel," I whispered, "we have to go." We ran toward the exit, but the main door was locked electronically. Rachel pulled out her press badge and smashed the nearest alarm panel with it. The door unlocked with a buzz, and we bolted into the parking lot. A black van sat across the street, headlights off. The side door slid open. For a split second, I thought we were caught. But then David stumbled out. "Sarah," he shouted. "Get down." I froze. It was him, alive, but barely standing, his clothes torn, face bruised. Rachel grabbed my arm. But before we could move, Men in suits poured out of the van behind him. One of them shouted, "Grab them." David pulled something from his pocket and threw it at the ground. A flashbang. The light was blinding, the noise deafening. I felt Rachel's hand grip mine as we ducked behind a nearby car. When the light faded, the men were stumbling. David ran toward us. "Come on. This way." We sprinted across the street, hearts pounding. Behind us, gunfire erupted, small pops that echoed through the night. Rachel screamed, "They're shooting!" David led us into an alley, then through a chain-link gate into an old train yard. We hid behind a rusted cargo container, gasping for air. He turned to me, his face pale but determined. "Sarah, listen to me. Franklin was just a cover. North Star's been using the factory to build components for weapons testing. The machines, those prototypes, they weren't for industry. They were part of a military contract." Rachel's eyes widened. "You're saying the fire was to destroy evidence," David said. Franklin panicked when he realized the regulators were unstable. But when the fire failed to wipe everything, North Star stepped in to clean up the mess. I shook my head. "This is insane. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I tried," he said softly, "but they grabbed me before I could." We could hear sirens in the distance now, police or federal agents, it was hard to tell. Rachel looked at him. "We have proof now. Between your testimony and Sarah's evidence, we can expose everything." David nodded. "Then we need to reach the press again, before North Star finds us." He handed me a flash drive, his fingers shaking. "Everything's in here. Names, contracts, payment trails. Get it to Rachel's editor. If anything happens to me, don't stop." Before I could respond, headlights swept across the yard. Another van. David turned toward it, eyes wide. "Run!" Men poured out again, shouting. Bullets struck the metal container beside us with sharp clangs. Rachel pulled me behind another train car. David ran in the opposite direction, drawing their fire. "David, no!" I screamed. He turned back for just a second, his face caught in the light.
"Go!" he yelled.
Then the van door opened, and someone inside raised a gun. A single shot rang out. David fell. Everything inside me went silent. I ran toward him, but Rachel grabbed me. "No, Sarah," I screamed, struggling against her, but she held tight. More vans were arriving, more men pouring in. Sirens filled the air, real ones now, federal agents flooding the yard. The attackers scattered, running into the dark. Rachel pulled me behind a truck, holding me as I sobbed.
"He did it, Sarah."
"He got us the proof. Don't let it be for nothing." 2 days later, the Beacon published the full story. The headline read, "North Star Weapons Testing Scandal, Cover-Up Exposed by Factory Whistleblower." It went national within hours. Franklin Metals was shut down. Arrests followed, executives, contractors, even a few federal officials. David's name became a symbol of courage across the country. And me? I stood at his graveside weeks later, holding a small silver flash drive in my palm, the one that had started it all. "I told you we'd make it right," I whispered. "We did it, David. We told the world." The wind blew softly across the grass. For the first time in months, I felt peace. But as I turned to leave, a black car parked at the edge of the cemetery caught my eye. A man in a dark suit sat inside, watching me. When I looked directly at him, he smiled. Then he drove away. I stood there for a long time, the peace in my chest slowly fading to unease. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. David had been right. North Star wasn't the only one in charge. And somewhere out there, someone much bigger was still pulling the strings.